Welcome, dear listener, to a tranquil space where the world outside fades away and a sense of calm washes over you. Tonight, we invite you to close your eyes, settle into your most comfortable position, and let your imagination carry you to a peaceful valley farm. The gentle rhythm of rain has begun to fall, a soothing melody that sets the stage for our story. Tonight's tale is called A Rainy Night's Tale, The Farmer's Shelter. A story about kindness, companionship, and the quiet comfort of a night spent listening to the rain. Let the worries of the day drift away like raindrops on a window pane as we begin our journey to the farm of a gentle soul named Elias. Breathe in deeply, exhale slowly, and allow the peace of the rainy night to surround you. The gentle patter of rain began to fall upon the valley, a soft, rhythmic drumming that echoed through the hills and whispered across the fields. It was a sound as old as time itself, a lullaby of nature that promised rest and renewal. The air, still carrying the warmth of the day, held a subtle sweetness from the late blooming wildflowers that dotted the edges of Elias's fields. A gentle breeze rustled through the leaves of the old apple tree near his porch, its branches swaying in time with the approaching storm. On this small farm, nestled like a cozy secret within the valley's embrace, lived Elias, a man who carried the wisdom of the season in his weathered hands and the love for his animals in his kind eyes. Elias was a man in his middle years, his hair touched with silver at the temples, a testament to the many years he had spent working under the vast expanse of the sky. His face, lined like the furrows of his fields, told stories of sun and rain, of hard work and quiet joys. Though not a man of great fortune, Elias possessed a wealth that couldn't be measured in coins, the unwavering loyalty of his animals and the deep connection he felt to the land he tended. His clothes were simple, often patched and worn, but always clean, a reflection of his respect for himself and his work. His boots, though sturdy, bore the marks of countless miles walked across his farm, each scuff and crease a memory of a day's labor. His farmhouse was small and simple, its whitewashed walls showing their age, but the windows glowed with a warm, inviting light as evening approached. A wisp of smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the comforting aroma of wood smoke and a simple supper simmering on the stove. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of dried herbs hanging from the rafters and the faint, earthy smell of the worn wooden floorboards. Nearby stood the main barn, a larger, more weathered structure that housed his 3 gentle cows, Daisy, Buttercup, and Bess, Each had their own comfortable stall, lined with fresh, sweet-smelling straw. The low mooing of the cows was a constant, soothing presence, a gentle reminder of the life that thrived within its walls. To the side of the barn was a sturdy wooden enclosure for his small flock of 15 sheep, their woolly coats appearing almost luminous in the fading light as they grazed peacefully. Their soft bleating mingled with the gentle patter of the rain, creating a calming symphony of nature's sounds. Adjacent to the sheep pen was a similar, but slightly smaller enclosure for his 5 playful goats, their curious eyes always watching Elias as he moved around the farm. The goats, with their nimble movements and playful antics, often brought a smile to Elias's face. Their presence a reminder of the simple joys of life. Further from the main barn, nestled amongst the shade of a few elderberry bushes, Elias had built a cozy rabbit hutch, a multi-tiered structure where a family of 6 rabbits, their noses constantly twitching, nibbled contentedly on clover and fresh hay. The soft rustling of their fur and the gentle sounds of their chewing created a peaceful counterpoint to the growing storm. Closer to the farmhouse was a chicken coop, a sturdy wooden building painted a cheerful yellow, where his flock of hens and a proud rooster, Reginald, scratched and pecked throughout the day. The contented clucking of the hens was a familiar sound, a constant reminder of the simple rhythm of farm life. And above the chicken coop, attached to the roof, was a simple but effective pigeon loft, home to a dozen or so pigeons whose gentle cooing often filled the air, a soft, melodic counterpoint to the sounds of the farm. Patrolling the entire farm, a constant shadow and loyal companion, was Barnaby, Elias's scruffy terrier, his bark a familiar sound that kept a watchful eye on everything. His presence was a constant reassurance, a furry guardian in the heart of the farm. As the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, painting the clouds in fiery hues, a change swept through the valley. The gentle breeze picked up, carrying with it the scent of damp earth, a sure sign of the approaching downpour. Elias, his gaze fixed on the darkening sky, felt a familiar unease settle in his stomach. The old barn, where the cows slept, had developed a troublesome new leak just last week, and he worried about them the most. The roofs of the rabbit hutch and chicken coop also had their weak spots, and the thought of his animals exposed to the elements filled him with a sense of responsibility. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, splattering on the dusty ground and the leaves of the old apple tree near his porch. Elias watched from his doorway as the rain intensified, the drops growing heavier and more frequent, each one a tiny percussion instrument in nature's orchestra. The wind began to sigh through the trees, their branches swaying rhythmically in response, creating a mesmerizing dance against the darkening backdrop. He could hear the distant rumble of thunder, a low growl in the darkening sky, a promise of the storm's growing intensity. He finished his simple supper quickly, his mind already making its rounds of the farm, picturing each of his animals in their shelters. He thought of Daisy, the youngest cow, her large eyes often reflecting a hint of nervousness during storms. He pictured the sheep huddled together, their thick wool potentially becoming heavy and cold, their soft bleating a vulnerable sound in the face of the approaching storm. He hoped the goats, with their innate wisdom for finding dry spots, had managed to tuck themselves away in the highest corner of their enclosure, their playful energy subdued by the approaching weather. He worried about the rabbits in their hutch, so low to the ground and exposed to the elements, their delicate forms vulnerable to the cold and damp. He trusted the chickens would huddle together for warmth and dryness in their coop, their soft clucking a sound of quiet resilience, and he hoped the pigeons, with their instinct for seeking shelter, would remain safely in their loft, their gentle cooing a peaceful counterpoint to the growing storm. And of course, his loyal Barnaby would likely seek refuge on the covered porch, but Elias still worried about him being out in the elements, his furry body exposed to the wind and rain. The rain was now coming down in earnest, a steady drumming on the roof of his house, punctuated by the occasional clap of thunder that echoed through the valley, shaking the very windows of his small home. Elias could no longer ignore his growing anxiety. The warmth and dryness of his small home felt almost selfish when he pictured his animals facing the storm in their various shelters, some more secure than others. He imagined the cold, damp air seeping into the rabbit hutch, the wind whipping through the gaps in the chicken coop, the rain soaking the sheep's thick wool, and the cows huddled together in the leaky barn. With a sigh of Jushin, Elias rose from his chair. He pulled on his well-worn rain boots, the familiar squeak of the rubber a comforting sound in the midst of the storm's growing fury. He reached for his trusty lantern, its glass a little clouded with age, but its beams still strong and reliable, and carefully lit the wick, the small flame casting a warm glow in the darkening room, a beacon of hope against the encroaching storm. Barnaby, his senses acutely tuned to his master's intentions, rose from his usual spot by the hearth, his tail giving a soft thump against the wooden floor, his intelligent eyes filled with concern and loyalty. "Come on, old friend," Elias murmured, gently scratching behind Barnaby's ears. "We have some friends to check on." Stepping out into the stormy night felt like entering another world. A wall of water slammed against him, the wind threatening to rip the lantern from his grasp. The darkness was profound, broken only by the flickering circle of light cast by his lantern and the terrifyingly beautiful flashes of lightning that momentarily illuminated the farm in stark, ghostly detail. The sound of the rain was overwhelming, a constant, roaring symphony that seemed to swallow all other sounds. The wind howled through the trees, their branches thrashing wildly, creating a chaotic dance against the backdrop of the storm. His first concern was the rabbit hutch, situated slightly away from the main buildings. Elias made his way carefully through the wind-whipped rain, each step a struggle against the elements, Barnaby staying close, his wet fur brushing reassuringly against Elias's leg, a warm, comforting presence in the heart of the storm. Reaching the hutch, Elias shielded the lantern with his hand and peered inside. The rabbits were huddled together, their small bodies trembling, their noses twitching frantically, their eyes wide with fear. He noticed a significant puddle had formed on the floor of the lower tier, dangerously close to where the smallest rabbit, a fluffy white one named Snowdrop, was huddled. With a sigh of concern, Elias quickly grabbed an old, dry sack from beside the hutch and carefully placed it to soak up the water, whispering soothing words to the frightened creatures, his voice barely audible above the roar of the storm. Next, he navigated his way towards the chicken coop, the wind buffeting him from the side, making each step a challenge. The hens inside were in a state of considerable agitation, their clucking a frantic chorus of fear. Reginald, the proud rooster, let out a series of startled crows as Elias approached, his usually confident demeanor shaken by the storm. Shining the lantern on the roof, Elias spotted a steady stream of water trickling down near the corner where Henrietta, his oldest and most reliable layer, usually slept. He quickly located a spare bucket near the coop and positioned it to catch the dripping water, hoping to keep Henrietta dry and comfortable. He also double-checked the latch on the door to the outside run, ensuring it was securely fastened against the relentless wind and rain, preventing any of his feathered friends from being swept away by the storm. Above the coop, the pigeons in their loft were also disturbed, their gentle cooing replaced by a more anxious fluttering and rustling. Elias called out to them, his voice barely carrying through the storm, offering words of comfort, even though he knew they likely couldn't understand. He hoped the simple shelter of the loft, built high and sturdy, was enough to protect them from the worst of the downpour and the biting wind. He imagined them huddled together, seeking warmth and reassurance in each other's presence. His attention then turned to the sheep pen. The flock was huddled together near the far side, their thick wool looking sodden and heavy, clinging to their bodies like wet blankets. They bleated softly as Elias approached, their eyes reflecting the lantern light with a hint of distress. He walked slowly around the enclosure, his boots sinking into the mud, checking for any areas where the rain was pooling or where the wind might have caused damage to the fence. He noticed a section of the fencing near the corner had come loose, the wire flapping dangerously in the wind, creating a potential escape route. With some effort, despite the wind and rain lashing at him, Elias managed to secure the wire, ensuring the sheep wouldn't be able to wander out into the storm-swept fields and get lost in the darkness. The goats, always more independent and resourceful, had sought shelter beneath a rocky overhang within their pen, their nimble bodies tucked close together, seeking refuge from the downpour. They watched Elias with a characteristic curious gaze, seemingly less perturbed by the rain than the sheep, their intelligent eyes observing his every move. Elias made sure their small, natural shelter was offering adequate protection from the wind-driven rain, and that they had a fresh supply of dry hay to nibble on, providing them with both sustenance and comfort. He even saw the smallest kid, a playful one named Pip, bravely venturing to the edge of the overhang to catch raindrops on its tongue. A small moment of lightness amidst the intensity of the storm. Finally, Elias and Barnaby, both thoroughly soaked, but their determination unwavering, made their way towards the main barn, the largest and oldest structure on the farm. The heavy wooden doors groaned ominously in the wind, threatening to swing open and expose the interior to the full force of the storm. Inside, the familiar smells of hay, manure, and animal fur were overpowering, now saturated with the pervasive dampness of the relentless rain. Daisy, Buttercup, and Bess turned their large, gentle eyes towards Elias as he entered, their expressions reflecting a mixture of worry and trust, their soft mooing a plea for reassurance. Elias went to each cow in turn, stroking their wet heads and murmuring soothing words, his voice a low, calming presence in the midst of the storm's chaos. He found that his earlier fears about Bess's stall were well founded. A steady stream of cold rainwater was cascading down from the roof, forming a growing puddle right where she usually lay down. With gentle coaxing, he led the old cow to a slightly drier stall, further away from the worst of the leak, ensuring she had a more comfortable place to rest. Buttercup, always the most easily spooked, was visibly trembling, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, so Elias spent several minutes rubbing her ears and speaking softly to her, her warm, damp muzzle nudging his hand in return, seeking comfort and reassurance. Even Daisy, usually the most independent of the three, seemed to appreciate his presence, her soft breath warm against his cheek as he checked her for any signs of distress. he noticed several other leaks in the barn roof, some creating sizable puddles on the straw-covered floor. The steady drip, 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 a constant reminder of the storm raging outside. Elias grabbed armfuls of fresh, dry straw from the loft, the scent filling the air with a sweet, earthy aroma, and spread it around, trying to soak up the excess water and create drier, more comfortable areas for the cows to lie down. He even used some old wooden boards and spare pieces of roofing to try and divert the flow of water away from the resting spots. His mind focused on making their night as comfortable as possible, finding a relatively dry corner near Bess, the old cow's steady breathing, a comforting presence in the dimly lit space. Elias spread out a thick layer of hay for himself, creating a makeshift bed. He knew sleep would be elusive tonight, but he felt a profound sense of responsibility to remain close to his animals, offering them whatever comfort and reassurance he could throughout the storm. Barnaby, his scruffy fur plastered to his body with rain, but his spirit undaunted, curled up at Elias's feet, letting out a deep, contented sigh. His warm presence, a small but significant comfort in the damp chill of the barn. The night unfolded slowly, each hour marked by the relentless drumming of the rain on the barn roof, punctuated by the steady drip, drip, drip from the leaks and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. Outside, the wind continued its mournful song, its cries weaving through the trees and around the corners of the barn, a wild and untamed melody. Inside the barn, the sounds of the animals were a constant presence, their soft breathing, the gentle rustling of straw as they shifted their weight, the occasional low moo or bleat that spoke of their unease, their collective presence creating a sense of warmth and companionship in the darkness. Elias would drift into a light, restless sleep, his senses still acutely attuned to any change in the sounds around him. He would awaken to the sharp crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very timbers of the barn, or to the worried lowing of one of the cows. Each time, he would rouse himself, his joints a little stiff and achy, and check on his animals, his lantern casting long, dancing shadows that played across the hay-filled stalls and the worried faces of his creatures. He might adjust a blanket draped over Daisy, offer a soothing word to Buttercup, or simply sit beside Bess, feeling the rise and fall of her gentle breathing, a silent reassurance in the heart of the storm. His thoughts drifted through the night, a tapestry woven with memories of past storms, of seasons of plenty and seasons of hardship, of the quiet joy he found in his simple life on the farm. He thought of his parents, who had toiled on this very land before him, their lives inextricably linked to the cycles of nature. He knew that farming was a life of constant challenges, of battling the unpredictable forces of weather and the ever-present struggle to make ends meet. but it was a life he wouldn't trade for any other. His animals were his family, his companions, and their well-being was his greatest concern, a responsibility he carried with love and dedication. As the hours slowly passed, the intensity of the rain gradually lessened. The wind began to die down, its howls softening into gentle whispers through the trees. A sigh of relief echoing through the valley. A faint grayness began to seep through the cracks in the barn walls, a promise of the approaching dawn, a hint of light breaking through the darkness. Elias stirred, a sense of quiet anticipation filling him. He could hear the birds outside beginning to chirp tentatively, their hopeful melodies a welcome sound after the long, stormy night. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle, a soothing rhythm that seemed to wash away the remnants of the darkness, a natural lullaby for the weary soul. He rose slowly, his muscles protesting slightly from his night on the hay, and Barnaby, sensing his movement, stretched languidly beside him, letting out the soft groan that mirrored Elias's own weariness. Together, they began their morning rounds. He checked on the rabbits first, relieved to see the sacking had absorbed most of the water, leaving the little creatures dry and safe. The chickens were still a bit ruffled, but seemed dry enough in their coop. The pigeons cooed softly from their loft, sounding much more content now that the storm was passing. The sheep were still damp, but looked calmer, their soft bleating less anxious, and the goats were already nibbling on hay, their playful energy slowly returning. Finally, he went to the cows. Bess looked up at him with grateful eyes, and Daisy nudged his hand with a soft muzzle. Buttercup let out a low, contented moo. Elias felt a wave of warmth spread through him. They had all made it through the night, safe and sound. The night in the old barn settled into a quiet rhythm, punctuated only by the persistent drumming of the rain on the roof and the occasional contented sigh from one of the cows. Elias, nestled in his corner on the bed of hay, felt a profound sense of peace wash over him. The initial anxiety of the storm had eased, replaced by a comforting awareness of his animals around him. He listened to the gentle breathing of Bess, the old cow, her presence a steady anchor in the dimly lit space. Daisy, the youngest, had finally settled down, her soft snores a reassuring sound. Even Buttercup, who had been the most skittish earlier, now rested quietly, her occasional twitching ears the only sign of lingering unease. Barnaby, curled tightly against Elias's legs, radiated a comforting warmth. Elias could feel the steady rise and fall of the dog's chest as he slept soundly, a loyal guardian even in slumber. The air in the barn was thick with the mingled scents of hay, damp earth, and the comforting aroma of the animals. It was a familiar smell, one that spoke of home and belonging, and tonight it felt particularly soothing. The lantern light, now turned low, cast long, dancing shadows on the wooden walls, creating an atmosphere of gentle intimacy. The air in the barn was thick with the mingled scents of hay, damp earth, and the comforting aroma of the animals. It was a familiar smell, one that spoke of home and belonging, and tonight it felt particularly soothing. The lantern light, now turned low, cast long, dancing shadows on the wooden walls, creating an atmosphere of gentle intimacy. Outside, the rain continued its steady descent, a constant lullaby that enveloped the farm in a blanket of sound. Each drop that struck the roof, each gentle drip from the leaks, seemed to contribute to a symphony of tranquility. The wind had softened to a whisper, sighing through the trees like a gentle lullaby. Elias closed his eyes, the sounds of the night washing over him. He thought of each of his animals, picturing their faces, their individual personalities. He thought of the rabbits, likely huddled together in their hutch, the chickens roosting peacefully in their coop, the pigeons nestled safely in their loft, the sheep and goats finding shelter in their enclosures. He had done all he could to ensure that comfort and safety, and now a sense of quiet satisfaction settled within him. He felt the soft rustling of straw as one of the sheep shifted in its pen, a gentle sound that spoke of peaceful rest. He heard the contented grunts of the pigs in their separate sty, a reminder of their simple pleasures. The soft cooing of a pigeon from the loft above the chicken coop drifted through the night air, a delicate melody in the rain's rhythm. As the night deepened, Elias felt his eyelids growing heavy, the warmth of Barnaby at his feet, the comforting presence of the cows nearby, the steady sound of the rain. It all combined to create a sense of profound relaxation. His muscles began to loosen, and the tension that had been lingering in his shoulders and neck began to melt away. His thoughts grew hazy, drifting like the clouds across the moonlit sky. He thought of the day's work, the simple tasks of caring for his farm, the satisfaction of seeing his animals thrive. He thought of the changing seasons, the endless cycle of life and growth on the land he loved. The sounds of the barn became his world, the soft breathing of his animals, the gentle patter of the rain, the occasional creak of the old wooden structure settling in for the night. These were the sounds of peace, the sounds of home. Slowly, gently, Elias drifted further into the embrace of sleep. The worries of the day faded away, replaced by a sense of deep contentment. He was in his shelter, surrounded by his beloved animals, safe and secure in the heart of his farm on this rainy night. The rhythmic sound of the rain became his final lullaby, carrying him into a deep and restful slumber, a slumber filled with the quiet peace of the moonlit, rain-kissed farm.